they're not what that's not a halcyon day, is it, of great leadership when you look back to people like Roosevelt. They praise him for such colossal accomplishments as rescuing us from our most terrible depression, when the free market, limited government principles of people like the men on this list and many others had all failed. And isn't that how it's always presented? Thank goodness this handsome, congenial, fireside, spouting man that could walk with the kings and the common people alike came in, and where others feared to tread, he came in and did it differently. Well, he did it a lot differently, didn't he? Differently than the people that set up our nation originally. So, one of the questions I'd ask is, must liberty-loving constitutionalists, I think I spelled that right, concede that, at least in this instance, the national government saved the American Republic and its people from themselves? And isn't that how it's often presented? Well, even Republicans and conservatives, a lot of times they'll say, this, and this. Oh, yeah, but in that case, we really needed what Roosevelt did because we were going down the tubes. Some conservatives, on the other hand, suggest that re-electing Republican Herbert Hoover, who I think was Ken Hoover's granddad, isn't that right, Ken? Oh, did we lose Ken? Roosevelt's predecessor in 1932, in other words, if Hoover had been re-elected instead of FDR getting elected, that would have allowed a much quicker and less painful end to the Depression. Well, let's pick on Hoover a little bit first, just to assure anybody that's watching this on YouTube or elsewhere, I guess, that we're equal opportunity offenders. Historians typically criticize Hoover as a do-nothing president. It's a pretty funny cartoon if you can see it there. He's trying to rock to sleep the little babies of business depression, tariff, drought, and damage, and other things. So isn't that in the popular imagination how he's referred? Oh, if Hoover had just done something, then we would have been out of it much more quickly. And indeed, Hoover himself was quoted in 1936 in the New York Times, 4 years after leaving the presidency, quote, "I rejected the schemes of economic planning to regiment and coerce the farmer. That was born of a Roman despot 1,400 years ago and grew into the AAA, Agricultural Administration, American Agricultural Administration, one of Roosevelt's New Deal big plans." Hoover continued, "I refuse national plans to put government into business in competition with its citizens. That was born of Karl Marx. I vetoed the idea of recovery through stupendous spending to prime the pump. That was born of a British professor, of course, Keynesian economics." Well, that all sounds real good, doesn't it? By the way, I wonder who he's taking orders from there. On that. Actually, it's a radio, so I don't know. But it all sounds good, doesn't it? So what about Hoover? We got to be careful we don't err to either side, don't we? For one thing, Hoover demanded that business leaders, now we're talking a stock market crash late 1929 and a couple of years following that, that they keep wages high, even when prices were declining. And I might add, even when it meant that a lot of people lost their jobs because their businesses could no longer afford to pay those high wages. Historian Thomas E. Woods Jr., which I commend to you, his tremendous book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, which I think Ken has copies of back there, he says that Hoover's mistake was to presume that high wages were the cause of American prosperity rather than a reflection of that prosperity. Okay? His promotion also of Hoover's promotion of labor union power, and he just a hat full of bills and acts that he supported that strengthened the grip of labor unions. It drained the strength of business and industry and accelerated the fomenting of union violence. And I might add, it also helped raise prices further for people that were less and less able to afford them. Once again, Thomas Woods. Actually, I don't want Thomas Woods there yet. Hoover also artificially raised American farm prices. And this was, those of you parents, grandparents, whatever, I bet if they were here today, they could tell a few stories on this part of the country. Even when far too many people, as we know now looking back, were still farming, he artificially raised the prices, thus multiplying already overflowing stocks. There he is signing the farm relief bill. In effect, rather than letting free market have its way, he kept people and businesses in business longer than they should have been, causing an agonizing and delayed death. He jacked up tariffs, import taxes, resulting in other nations retaliating against American exporters. When you read about this, you see a litany of countries that did that. In France, of course, it's in France, virtually locked American products altogether out of its country. Hoover, again, we're not even to FDR yet. Hoover championed tax increases, including the largest peacetime one in U.S. history, which further stunted private investment. In those critical years, late 29, 1930, 31, and 32, y'all know, being educated, intelligent, up on top of things as y'all are, that the stock market crash did not immediately spawn the Great Depression, right? Things were in bad shape at that point, but it got worse and worse. The Depression did not actually start in full until a couple of years after Black Thursday. More money was spent on public works projects in Hoover's 4 years than in the previous 30. This is interesting when you read what other people have to say about it. Rexford Tugwell. That's not exactly a Texas name, is it? I bet he's not from Texas. We didn't admit, well, he was one of the New Deal leaders, though, for Roosevelt. We didn't admit it at the time, but practically the whole New Deal was extrapolated from programs that Hoover started. So they criticized him, and I mean FDR raked him over the coals and said this do-nothing Hoover is going to lead us down into the black abyss. But behind the scenes, they were saying, wow, you know, he's got things headed in the right direction. We just need to build upon that. And there's many primary source documents beyond this one that vouch for that was their opinion. Here was Hoover's kind of assessment looking back on his own presidency and his approach to the gathering economic problems. We might have done nothing. That would have been utter ruin. Instead, we met the situation with proposals to private business and to Congress of the most gigantic program of economic defense and counterattack ever evolved in the history of the Republic. Well, he got that part right. He hardly restrained the national government, though. Rather, he unleashed it. He was kind of the lead act for the main show that soon came. The result of Hoover's actions, well, the U.S. economy plummeted farther each year after the stock market crash until Roosevelt crushed Hoover's November 1932 re-election bid. That's the famous motorcade, the inauguration of Roosevelt, where they're riding around together. So what were the justifications for FDR's historic and sweeping New Deal? Well, they said, you know, the way it was explained, we've got to do something to help millions of starving and otherwise suffering citizens. We've got to help them help themselves. We need to stimulate the economy. Hoover's not doing it. We have a constitutional obligation to provide work and security. General welfare is a lot of times where they went with that, pulling from the Constitution and twisting and distorting those words. Obligation to the people. Also to stimulate a stable job market for the future. Now here's 10 tough facts for New Deal defenders. So these would be things that you all could pull out to question central government intervention then and now. And yes, we know there are many others. We have limited time. And by the way, Cato Institute Senior Fellow Jim Powell, I commend him to you. His book, FDR's Folly. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. Maybe Ken has, or maybe he can get it for you. But this guy is a real thinker and a real lover of liberty. And he knows the good, the bad, and the ugly on the Hoovers and the Roosevelts of the world.